Our guest today is Leah Tharin, a leading product-led growth advisor for scaling B2B companies, a former interim CPGO of Got Photo, which has been acquired by EQT, and a product leader for Jua.ai and Small PDF. She's now a program creator, lecturer, executive coach, and portfolio growth advisor to VC funds such as Notion Capital, and shares her expertise through her blog, podcast, guides, and a variety of courses. Welcome to the podcast, Leah.
Thank you for having me, Shannon. It's nice to be here.
So we really want to dig into product growth specifically, which is a little bit of a mysterious subject for people in the product management realm. And we want to begin by asking you to just define for us what you see as the right definition of product growth.
So, of course, my definition is the correct one because what I say is correct. And I think a girl needs to have some confidence nowadays. No, but like without a joke, I think there's an interesting word salad going around in the industry in general. The way that you can think about growth or product-led growth in that sense is if you're thinking about a normal buying cycle, like I'm going to build something that I want to advertise to the people, then we always thought about someone is going to do the marketing, someone's going to do the product, and someone's going to do the selling. And that's kind of like the entire cycle. So there's a message somewhere, we're promising something over marketing, and then there's a product that is going to do something, right? Hopefully the promise and the delivery are sort of overlapping as much as is possible, and then the salespeople are overcharging you as much as they can to get the most value out of it for the company. And that used to be like the selling model for, I would say, decades almost. The thing that we are trying to understand with a growth function in that sense is that there is a pretty big gap between the marketing message, so what I promise, and the product that you're getting. And what that means is in general is that when I'm telling you that you should try something, like, I don't know, I'm telling you to use a new conditioner. And by the way, if we were to put it into the description, I actually have a really good conditioner for this one, which I just learned about. But if I'm recommending you something or you hear about it somewhere and then you want to try it, there's an entire way between my recommendation or the marketing message that you've heard in some kind of way and you actually trying out the product. There's a buyer's journey. There is a journey where the first time you're going to use it, how you're going to, how you're just going to like turn from a completely clueless user to becoming someone that is actually using the product. And what we talk about this in the context of B2B SaaS or like tech is how can we optimize the onboarding journey? How can we make it as slick as possible for you to do that? Now, why is this important? This is important because not everybody like Leah is recommending stuff to you, but you kind of have to just trust your sort of gut. Sometimes you also don't know, like in B2B SaaS, like there's complex software solutions and stuff. So what we started to do as companies is we started to create product-led growth demos and freemiums and trials that you can try for free, right? So there's very little friction for you to kind of give this stuff a try. Now that's nice and all, but the problem is in order for something to be used for free by a stranger without a salesperson standing next to it to kind of explain it to you, there's a lot of craft that goes into this, a lot of experience. And this is what we call growth. So a growth team is usually responsible in optimizing the conversion rates between how many people hear about a message and how many people are using the product afterwards. So it's about conversion rates. It's not about how many people we are bringing in. It's not about how many people we are using the product. It's about how many people of those that have been brought in are using the product afterwards, right? So how fast can I optimize the first customer's experience or the first prospect's experience to experience the time to value so they start to understand, oh, this is why Leah was recommending this product. Oh, this is why this is the kind of thing. And what we do in product-led growth is we try to do this entire journey before we monetize anything. So we're saying that, it's kind of like try before you buy, that sort of thing. I'm just going to stop here, but really quickly, like growth is really sitting between marketing, promising something and product building something. And, traditionally we had no one that was really taking care of this. And it is such an important function in a company that We usually have about one team for growth per every four product teams. That's so like about 25% of the budget for product is going just into growth alone.
So this is an interesting question that I often have been asked by people who have not experienced a company where they have a team that is focused on growth. But where does that growth team typically sit in an organization, and how do they work with the other teams that you mentioned?
There's never conflict around this question, of course. So it's very easy because I'm telling you now, and then you can do it as well. No, the the issue that you usually have is you have about three or four different options. So the first option is you put it under sales. The second option is you put it under marketing. The third option is you put it under product. And the fourth option is you put it as its own sort of function somewhere. So I'm just going to start. Let's just sort out the stuff that makes no sense under sales. It makes absolutely no sense because it's not a sales function. The thing with growth, if you agree with what I just described as product-led growth, is very much in the interest of the customer, right? Like we want to really connect you as fast as possible with value. That's not the goal of sales. So what sales wants to do is they want to maximize the amount of money that you can charge for whatever services you have. This is also reflected in incentivizations and so forth that they have. They also usually have absolutely no overlap with growth that they could help you with, right? They're not marketers. They're not close to the product. There's no synergies there at all. Under marketing is quite a popular model. So I'm currently, for instance, advising for User-Centrics, which is a company that deals with privacy, you know, like everything that has to deal with privacy, like cookie banners and so forth. So like a really, really, really big gig. And they're structuring it all under marketing. Under marketing, it's already a bit better because it is sits so close to marketing, you know, like where all the promises are being made. You have a lot of access to their landing pages, their campaigns. Like if marketing is creating something like in events and so forth, it makes sense to have it also structured onboarding for these clients and so forth. So that already makes a lot of sense. But my favorite by far is to put it on the product for two reasons. The first one is if you think about what a growth team does on a day-to-day basis, then it usually requires a product manager, a designer, a couple of engineers, and that already sounds like a product team, right? It sounds exactly like a product team. So you have to deal with onboarding flows. So you need to code, you need to commit stuff to the code and so forth. And this is very, very close to how a product team already operates. Whereas if you put it with marketing, marketers are notorious for not knowing how to work with engineers because it's not just like, hey, Larry, just change something in the code base, we make a ticket and then it's going to be done. That's just not how it works, right? Like this does not work. So I favor it under product. A good other alternative is to put it under marketing. There's usually not an individual kind of silo that is just called growth. Sometimes you have that, but it's not like in the sense that I've described it right now. But I think the most important thing is if you want to do growth right, is wherever you put it, they need to be very independent because they're getting on the nerves of everybody, right? So a typical growth team is messing with the pricing to some degree. So they're going to annoy sales. They're going to mess a little bit with the messaging. So they're going to annoy marketing. And they're also going to change things inside of the products, not the products themselves, but you know, like how you're experiencing them, and maybe whether we hide some stuff for newer customers or not. And so that's going to annoy product. So it is a very conflict-heavy, silo in that sense.
Is there maybe a particular time in a company's evolution where you feel like growth team or growth effort is appropriate, or is it more like, well, you should just have it from the outset and then you don't have to worry about integrating them later? Like, what's your
Oh,
experience been with that?
yeah. So that's a very good question. I think in general, and I'm generalizing hard here because it might sometimes differ by industry. So for instance, you can take two identical companies with the same amount of revenue, the same amount of clients, the same amount of size of clients. So for instance, you have an ACV, like an annual contract value of about $5,000 to $10,000. And one of these companies is running PLG. So they have no sales team. They're doing everything self-served. And the other company that is completely identical is running it with salespeople. And the difference between these companies might be that one company is selling to developers. So because the target customers are different it might make more sense to have a product-led growth team and motion, whereas the other one doesn't. But having said that, if you're ignoring different ICPs in different industries, I think it's very weird if you have 15 million in revenue upwards and there is just no growth team. Very commonly, what that means is that if you're a pure PLG company, so like let's say you're doing completely product-led growth, everything is self-served, which is the case for most companies, by the way, right now that are starting in SaaS, which are kind of like selling, like their AI wrappers and all that kind of stuff. If you're starting to grow relatively fast, after like 5 to 6 million, you start to realize that you need salespeople. Because you start to have some inbound, like for instance, I don't know, I'm selling some services to remove backgrounds and so forth. And then you have a school that is starting to ask like, hey, what happens if we are buying, I don't know, 100 licenses and so forth? Can you make us a volume deal? And the interesting topic in there is like, this is one thing that I also specialize in. It's called product-led sales, which is the combination of product-led growth and sales. So to answer your question, I think after 15 million, you're leaving money on the table if you do not have that. Having said that, I know 2 relatively popular companies that are running at $100 million in ARR, and they do not have growth teams. I do not think they are successful because of this, but despite that. So, everybody's kind of having their own sort of favorite, but there's also examples for not doing it. But I think it's just, at that size, you have so many customers and so much money that it helps just like to improve the onboarding flow by 10% every year. That's just cash, right? It's just, and it's relatively easy to do.
How does the growth team, if at all, get involved in product-led sales? And what exactly is product-led sales? Is that something that most companies just have by default?
So this is a very difficult thing to kind of define. I'm one of the people that is writing quite a lot about it in the sense that product-led sales is this weird mashup between sales and product-led growth. So like, let's say you have both functions. So you have some kind of form where you are selling your product in a way that you can try it for free. But at the same time, it's also possible to book a demo with your salespeople. And that makes a lot of sense, right? This is the reality for a lot of people, for a lot of companies, especially if you're above like 10, 15 million or something. There's almost no company that I'm aware of that has absolutely no salespeople. So having said that, that means you will have a mid-market segment of customers that are falling somewhere in between. They need a little bit of self-serve, but they might have some questions that only a salesperson can answer. They might just go for sales because they do not want to do self-serve, so it gets a little bit muddy. The interesting thing in there is, how do we route the customers between booking demos or sales calls? What do we tell them in that? When should they be redirected back to the self-serve motion? How do we think about incentivizing salespeople who are taking the call from someone from the first time, and then these people go into the self-serve motion and we never talk to them again? Like, should I pay a salesperson like this bonuses or not? So this is the really interesting thing here. And a common good, or like a definition that I think is really good for product-led sales is like, how can we optimize the sales process for mid-market segments in a way that the CAC is as low as possible and the friction is as low as possible wherever is in the interest of the customer. So that could be that you're experiencing the product completely by yourself, 100%, and then you just call the salesperson to just negotiate the rates. Or the other way around, you have a salesperson trying to show you something that is very, very integration heavy. And then once that is done, you are finishing the entire onboarding on the platform because the pricing is simple. So whatever your poison is that you're picking, in a way, what we're trying to do is we're trying to generate leads that have not been possible before. We're trying to route leads. So we're trying to make sure that who is going to go to a salesperson and who is not. And we're trying to improve the handling of leads. So that could look like that in a sense that, let's say you're calling a salesperson and the salesperson does not only know who you are, which is very common for most sales-led companies, but now they also know what you're doing. So if someone picks up the phone as a salesperson and knows like, hey, Shannon, I see that you have been using the product in this way, or like they just know it before you start talking, that is shortening the conversations. It also gives you a very good first impression, like, hey, Leah knows what she's talking about. So it's not just about, hey, Shannon, how can I help you, right? Like, and then describe your entire personality to me, like the fifth time that you've done with our company. So it's a lot about convenience and figuring out how we can make a better product. Like a final point on this one for product-led sales, if you have a product-led growth motion like this, that means also you have much more people using your product in total because you have a free version, right? So for instance, we are talking about 7% in a good B2B company are paid customers and 93% are free ones. And that means you start to have a lot of people that you can experiment around with when it comes to your interface. So stuff doesn't look that ugly, so you can actually objectively test whether something is easier to use rather than just like thinking about, maybe, I'm not sure how this feels. Right now we can test it because we have so many users. Yeah.
Yeah, and your comment there just brought up a lot of topics that I wanted to touch on here. And one of them is you mentioned CAC. So that's customer acquisition cost. I would love to know, what are the top metrics or measures of success that a growth PM would typically use to know whether what they're doing is actually working as intended? Is CAC one of those metrics?
That's a very good question. So I'm not aware that CAC has ever been used for a growth team because the problem is also attribution cost, right? So that means, can I make sure that I know what it cost us that Shannon got into our product? Now, for sales, this is easier to calculate because it's usually about like, hey, how much time did you take from our salespeople? How many Shannons did I have to call until I was actually closing one of them and so forth? So CAC is relatively easy to calculate for sales in that sense, which means that it's also relatively clear to attribute, unless we're talking about blended CAC and all this other shenanigans. But let's just assume the world is simple. The metrics that you're evaluating a growth team commonly around is around the free motions that you have and then the conversion rates that they have into the paid version. So for instance, if I'm having a freemium, this conversion rate that I said, what we would be measuring is how many people that are coming are converting into another state. So a state would be from free user to trialist, from trial to customer. Or sometimes when I work with companies, commonly what we do is we try to find a good aha moment. So an aha moment would be, what is the first moment where a customer or a prospect has experienced the value of the product for the very, very first time? Where is the moment that they really get it, right? Like they have experienced it. It's not just about, oh, Shannon told me this is awesome. It's the moment of like, and now I understand why Shannon was recommending me this, right? So that sort of moment. So in a way, it is the proof. I went from assuming that you might be a good fit to me to now I know whether you are a good fit with me. And this time that it takes to go from this point of being like a random stranger to understanding, okay, this is really for me, shortening this time, the physical time it takes is usually something that you wouldn't measure in a growth team. Mm-hmm. Because the faster I can bring you to this, the more correlative it is for revenue that I'm going to make afterwards with you.
Okay, so I'd love to just emphasize that. You said that the time it takes from somebody on their first touch point with your product to when they actually become, say, a paying customer or even a trialist matters. So it is an element of time, and we're talking about days, months, that kind of thing, right? Okay, so bringing that time down is a goal for typical growth
Exactly.
teams.
So in any one of these processes, now if you're talking about B2B, you have two time spans. One of them is the one that we are operating in, and one of them is the one that the customer is operating in. You cannot stress the customer. That never works. You cannot hurry up someone else's legal due diligence or how fast that they are evaluating a product. You can never do that. But what you can do on your own side is you can make your own processes faster. Like, how do we react? How fast does customer support react? How fast does customer success react? How fast does sales react? How easy is it to really set up a product and realize this kind of value, right? Like this is within our control. So maybe, so when we're talking about time to value, so like this TTV metric, as we call it, And then we're really talking about like how fast is it for the first user to really understand what we are doing? And it's not about payment. It's more about like, hey, usually this aha moment is before the payment step. So, for instance, like at Jua, when we were generating weather forecasts, the time to value would be the first time you start to get the entire forecast for your home or whatever you're starting to enter in the first time. And then you just see like, oh my God, they have 4 weeks ahead forecasts with a predictability that I've never seen before. That will be an aha moment where you say like, okay, now I get it. I'm getting it, what you're selling.
So the other thing I wanted to ask about was whether any of these approaches differ if it's a B2B versus a B2C company. The customers might be a little bit different, but do the approaches have to fundamentally change?
Yeah, so commonly what you can say, like let's take a very typical B2C business, which would be like Netflix for most of the people or Spotify. If we're now ignoring the partnership side of this, right? But like let's say you and me are listening to Spotify or to Netflix and so forth, this is a B2C connection. The reason why there is no salesperson involved in that is that it's just not feasible, right? The CAC is way too high to deal with Leah for $9 a month or whatever it costs. So by definition, B2C businesses are doing PLG by default. They just don't know it. It's just the only thing that's there. But a lot of people don't talk about it because why would you differentiate something if you don't have a choice anyways? So it's just growth, right? The thing is that B2C product-led growth, if you want to call it this way, because product-led growth is technically a B2B term, it does differ a little bit as well. So in B2C, very, very, very often, if you're selling to customers, you need to deliver value even faster, right? So it's even more about speed. It is also much more about rebates. It is much more about commodity, which means that you have usually a couple of choices that you can make. So for instance, let's say you're single and you want to date. You can take Tinder, you can take Bumble, Hinge, Ghost, whatever they're called, right? You have a lot of choice, which is very interchangeable. And sometimes they just differ and they're fighting against each other a lot on price. Now, that's also the case for B2B, but the difference is that I can incentivize you in B2C products much more for if you recommend someone else, for instance, then you get a free month. You cannot do that in B2B. That does not work. It does not work at all because in B2B, it tends to be still in a way that I want you to get something for free so we have a good connection. That's the value that I'm getting. But as soon as I'm getting paid, it sounds unprofessional and not that working, right? Or we also have a difference in the length of trials. So in B2B, oftentimes products are based on collaborative efforts. Think about a Jira or Slack or any communication thing. For a team to evaluate a product takes a much longer time than for an individual to make a short decision. So sometimes in most B2C products, I can make a decision within 10 minutes. Is this for me or is it not, right? And then I may be making a decision whether I'm going to do a trial or not. For B2B products, you would very rarely structure trials under 30 days or 14 days. This is the number one thing that I correct with most of my clients if they have too short of trials, right? Like they think this works like B2C. So by and large, it's the same, but we have details in the finer print and what motivates people. But I'm more specialized on B2B, just to be clear.
Yeah, I've been in classes for growth in particular where they talk a lot about growth loops. And is what you're saying there is that the loop works well for, say, a consumer business, but it's a little bit different for a B2B because of the fact that you can't refer people. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, what we talk about when we talk about a loop is sort of a self-reinforcing behavior. The way that I usually explain it to keep it simple is that if you have a stranger that is getting turned into a prospect and then a customer, there's also a step where you kind of try to turn them into a fan, and a fan might recommend someone. And if you just look at stuff like in a funnel, then you might think, oh, I have 1,000 visitors, and out of these 1,000 visitors, I'm going to convert 10 people, and then I'm going to do out of these 10 people, something else is happening. The problem is that the recommendation that comes at the end is turning into yours in your statistics tool into one visitor. But that one visitor that has been recommended is infinitely more valuable than just a random person that's coming from, I don't know, a Google keyword or whatever. Because if you have been recommended, then there's much more drive behind it, right? Like this person probably knows already something that the other people do not, and so forth. And
Right.
loops are reinforcing behaviors like you can use this for free if we can use your content and if the content is branded by us and then other people are hearing about it. So that will be a UGC loop, like a user-generated content loop. For instance, LinkedIn works like this. If you post a status, you give LinkedIn sort of value for the community to use it and so forth. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I do see growth spoken about most often as one monolithic thing, but it sounds like the differences between how growth is treated in B2B versus B2C are pretty, they're pretty profound. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think the main differences are between the two?
It is very complex to scale a business that wants to do certain moves in the market as a B2B company. You have to think like we always saying like B2C and B2B. But B2B is just in itself a huge microcosmos of a lot of different client segments. So we have the upmarket, which is enterprise. Enterprise motions are extremely complex and they're usually sales-led driven, which is okay. That's fine. I have nothing against sales-led companies. It's just that if you have an offering that is sold to enterprises and then you also have something that is into the mid-market and then also like something into a lower market because there's also micro companies that's not B2C, but these are companies like, I don't know, like if you're an entrepreneur or you're a solopreneur or whatever, like a small agency. These are wildly different segments. And now you need to have an organization that can deal with this. And that sounds simple, but what it does is if salespeople are in a call with a $5 million a year company and your yearly revenue is 20 million, then that means that 25% of your revenue is right now on the line. And that means that you're probably going to listen to what the salesperson says. So for instance, someone might come back and say that, hey, if we're not closing this client, something terrible is going to happen. We just need feature A and B and C. And that happens all the time. And then companies have to make a decision whether they're going to risk this or not. So for instance, they also have to pay attention that they're not becoming like an agency because they're just always fulfilling, the dreams of salespeople and so forth. So at the same time, they only have one engineering team that is building one product. And bridging this kind of gap is a huge challenge. I write a lot about this, like how we build organizations can actually sustain this, because sales is working different than a growth team. And then marketing is also somewhere in the mix. And then you also have, to further complicate the entire thing, you have customer success, which is focusing on the most important part of product-led growth, which is expansion. And expansion revenue is so important because what we believe in product-led growth is not to acquire customers at a high price point. What we want to do is we want to acquire them at a low price point so they expand afterwards. Because we know that building up trust on a gradual kind of scale is better for the long-term revenue. And that's not how sales works, of course. And so that's the fundamental difference. And that's what makes this so incredibly hard to kind of scale and structure. It's an organizational challenge.
I'd love to know a little bit about how you got into this area. I have read a little bit about your background, and it's very diverse, and that seems to be coming in very handy since
Yeah.
growth really spans a lot of disciplines. Can you give us a little bit of a story about how you got here?
Yeah, it's all a bit weird. I think I'm trying to keep it short, but like there's two sides to this. So one side is that the topic itself of growth was something that came up in different contexts. It never really had the name growth. So now I'm coming from Switzerland and I had the the fortunate kind of turn of events in my life that I was hired into Small PDF as a product manager. And Small PDF at the time I think I was employee number 20 or something. So we were quite small at the time. We had like, I think a couple of million revenue, like 2 million in revenue. And we were growing the business extremely fast, like hyper growth. Like after 3 years, we were at 30 million in ARR, like extremely fast, extremely successful kind of story in that sense. And so this was the first time I was sort of stuck in a hyper growth environment. And what that means usually in Europe is that you have a lot of work that is more natural to American companies. So, like the classical product teams where you work in a certain way and it's not just project management, which is so predominantly still existing in Europe for some reason. but this was just a place where we started to have to really wise up and learn much more about the theory behind it, because I also wanted to understand what was going on. And it was relatively clear that we were all quite underdeveloped on the growth side. Now, I was not managing a growth team at Small PDF. I was leading the core product itself. Um, but at the same time, we started to learn that, growth is good for pretty much everybody, at least as a theoretical foundation in the company, because you need to be a commercial PM. And I was never a commercial PM. I simply did not learn how to connect what I did with the numbers of the business on the outside. Now, I did have my own startups, and I was working mostly with sales-led companies, which is also quite, like a commercial background. But as soon as I was always in positions when it was just about product management, the commercial aspect was sort of kind of taken away from you. And this was the first time I really learned about companies that are sharing their numbers with you, where you saw your impact that you had. And then I just got lucky by having the correct boss that was pushing me towards this. And I think it was in 2021, I started to learn like crazy. I started to develop like one of these hyper interests. I started to post about it every day on LinkedIn twice. And I'm not talking about like some weird stereotypical bragging post, like really post with value. Like, hey, here's how this entire thing works. Here's how we did this stuff at Microsoft, or like here's how this thing that we did at Small PDF, and this is the concept and how the market works. So I kind of learned on the go with all these amazing resources. And then I started to realize that there's just not a lot of people who are doing this. And there was at the time, there was only, as far as I know, Elena Verna and some really like kind of smaller people. And I was like, you know what? I think I can do something in this space. I can educate it as well, because I like having these complex problems. And yeah, it sounded very sexy to me. And then, one thing came to the other. I started to blow up with my brand. I kind of had some traction that I could also prove. I got hired into companies, and opportunities became more and more interesting. For instance, I started to work with VC funds that were just sending me their pitch decks, which meant that I could evaluate their PLG motion. But at the same time, I heard about the problems of all these companies, which was very interesting for me. So I started to kind of realize that a lot of it is about finding win-win situations for you and the person across you. And I think the full loop around it is that the entire business that I built is fully PLG. So a lot of the stuff that you see from me online is completely free. My guides are completely free. My speeches are free. Everything is really free. And I'm putting a lot of it in there. There's only a couple of sections that I have on the Substack that are paid, but I'm running myself like a PLG business in the best case that I know. And yeah, it's been very fulfilling, to be honest. Yeah.
Yes, it's dog fooding in the extreme. I am a subscriber to Product Tea, and I also remember when you started posting in 2021, and I agree that there aren't as many.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
there aren't as many people out there as you would think, given the importance
Yeah.
of growth today. But I do wonder if it's changing. Do you feel that growth as a niche discipline is changing, particularly with AI and the way people are
Yeah.
doing business?
This is a great question. I think that at least when it comes to product, I'm quite certain that almost everybody needs to learn about growth, because the budget for just like core product management is going to go away. Not completely, of course, right? Like we're not talking about, product management is dead or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. But like the amount of share per dollar that it goes into a company that goes for product is going to decrease. And it's going to decrease for two other reasons, right? So like one of them is growth itself, and the other one is marketing. Marketing is becoming more expensive for the same output. There's no question about this. And that usually means that you have to be more commercial. So what I do, I sort of have to be able to anticipate better what it's going to do for the business, and that is growth, right? Like that is directly growth. So it's not just about optimizing onboarding flows for growth in the future. It's also about how can we keep people in the business. So, for instance, let's say I'm thinking about I want to expand my revenue. I can do this by acquiring new customers, or I can try to develop new stuff that I then sell in an upsell motion to my existing customers. And this function of growth for internal customers. So like, when should I talk to someone? When should I push upgrades onto them that really help them? That's also a growth discipline. It's just a different field, right? And I feel like this is very underrepresented right now. also in the material that is out there. But I do feel that product-led growth is becoming a table stake. So it's not that much anymore as the differentiator. You just have to do it at some point. And growth teams as well. If you don't have them, then you're not going to succeed in the market because marketing is so complicated that you can just not afford to have a shitty onboarding anymore.
What kind of tools or applications for AI in particular are helpful here?
So I'm going to say something a little bit controversial, but I need to also finish the sentence before I sound a little bit too crazy. So I do think that this entire vibe coding thing, like Lovable, Cursor, Replit, and all that kind of stuff, is very useful. I don't think it's good for replacing engineers. I'm not buying that. I really don't because I feel like it's just you're not going to turn into a good developer just because you can tell the AI what you want to build. Because, as soon as something is becoming more complex, it's becoming an issue. However, I do think that the path between idea and vision that someone has in their head and prototyping is becoming shorter and shorter and shorter, right? So if you think about like how hard it was 10 years ago to just have a website of yourself, and then we started to have these services pop up. And then it was easier to kind of register a domain. Nowadays, you can go on Lovable, you can create the website, book the domain, and you don't have to go anywhere else, right? So everything is becoming commoditized in this space. And I think in this regard, this is where AI can really help. So it can really rationalize away, or like, sorry, not rationalize, but like ration away the stupid part of the work that is very, very administrative anyways. And in that sense, for us as a consumer or like someone that is kind of working with it, you can do quite a lot in this regard. The other area that I'm really excited about, because I think it actually is really good, is if you feed it good data that is very unstructured. For instance, user research, data sources that are kind of hard to understand. So, for instance, there's a very exciting company right now that I'm working with. That is capable of analyzing screenshots and then developing alerts based on that. So for instance, you can take just a screenshot from another tool without the tool knowing and just say like, hey, if this curve is going to go up, send me an alert. And this is all AI. So you have image recognition, right? So for me, AI in many, many senses is about a connection between two systems. And we have not even begun to really understand which systems it can actually connect. Do I think that AI is great in kind of finding strategic decisions and new products? And is there going to be a $1 billion company from one person? Absolutely not. That's not how it works. If it's easy to do, then it's not going to make money.
I see that product management in general is changing in terms of skill sets and the backgrounds that people have. I love that you are such a fan of growth in particular. As people are looking to specialize, and maybe that'll be an opportunity for many people in the future if they have these special skills. What do you think would be most helpful for somebody who's interested in the area of growth?
This is a super difficult question, but I think whatever your decision is that you're going to do, try to learn about product-led growth first. Like try to understand like why, like what are the moving pieces behind product-led growth? Why is this a thing? How does the market work in general? I mean, this is also the reason why I created originally a course around this, because I wanted to really explain to people like, hey, here's how demand is generated in this motion. Here's why it works this way. And here's why the old way does not work anymore. Or like, when does this work and when does the other thing work and so forth. So it's more of like a theoretical kind of washdown. After this, whether you're going with my course or with a book or like with a course from Reforge, for instance, which are also quite good, it doesn't really matter. But then at that point, you kind of have to make a decision. And I highly encourage people to specialize. Forget AI. This is not about AI. This is not about like if you as a non-technical person are trying to understand AI, you're going to get lost. The space is moving so fast. Not even the engineers are kind of catching up unless they're like really, really specialized in AI, and they're actually coding these models or like they're training these models themselves. So what I highly recommend someone to do is to try go down a rabbit hole on something very specific. So for instance, for me, it was a complete black box in how you do monetization experiments. It was a complete black box how you are doing packaging and pricing in general, so how does all of this work? This is a difficult topic, And I did not know how to do this as well in the start. And there's not like a Bible that you can just like read and then you know about it. But that is a very good sign that it is a very defensible kind of point of knowledge for you as well, which you can advertise towards the market. So I think what a lot of people are getting wrong right now is that they think they have to include everything so they have a chance at any job. And that's not the case. If you're just a product manager, you have no profile. You have no edges that I can grab myself onto and say like, oh yeah, you're a specialist in this. There's no specialist PM. That does not exist. But there might be a specialist growth PM that is specialized in B2B monetization for B2B SaaS products. That is a specialization that I would say is a real one. And you have to learn it by yourself by just consuming stuff, maybe from Patrick Campbell, or you just go to these, whatever your sources are. And because it is hard to learn is why it is so exciting. If you have a course on something where millions of people have seen it already, it's not a specialization. I'm sorry. You're not going to get the fundamentals of AI in a course that everybody else is taking. It might be useful, but it is not going to be like the specialization that's going to get you hired for a $200,000 job a year. That's not happening. On monetization, that's a different topic for sure.
So you mentioned courses. I know you actually have a course. What
Yeah.
are the outlets where people can consume your educational content?
I think the thing is I'm never trying to push people to my course directly. I mean, I mentioned it right now, but like it was a genuine attempt to kind of say like, like this is a potential
Right.
starting point. But I would say that always try to read the free stuff from people. If you're reading my guides, for instance, like the product-led growth guide, it's completely free. If you like my writing, then you have already an indicator. It's also PLG, right? Like it's my free part of the content. You already have an indication whether you can follow my thought outlines, whether you like what I'm saying. If you don't, then you're going to look for someone else. So, for instance, Elena Verna, she talks more structured, I feel like, and a little bit more towards the lower B2B segments, but more also at scale sometimes. So, like we all have different kind of styles in what we write. Or, for instance, Ben Williams is also a great one. He's called the product like geek or something. So he's talking more around developers. He's extremely structured and like very, very thorough and stringent in that sense. And I feel like it's a really good idea to find a creator and a thought leader in that space, really see what they have before you make any decision. Because someone that talks about PLG that does not give you any free value beforehand is useless. And that also tells you that growth is usually also like a trust thing. Because for most companies, you're hiring the first person or you're working with someone for the first time, and I could tell you anything. So you need to be able to trust that person in some kind of way. And that usually happens by constant exposure on things that are like, okay, she seems to be doing the real work. That's where I would start.
Okay, I love that. I hadn't really thought about it as a trust relationship, but I
Yeah.
see that it is pretty high stakes, and it does, would you say it does add a little bit of maybe disruption to an organization that doesn't have a growth team
Yeah.
already, right? So you have to really, I don't know, be confident that what you're doing is going to reap benefits for you and not just disrupt overall, right?
Yeah.
Does it often happen that there is friction in an organization where you can't overcome that friction and the growth team can't get the work done that it needs to?
Yeah, and I can nail this on a very simple fact. When I started advising in this space about 3 to 4 years ago, I was talking to everybody, and now I don't talk to anyone except it's the CEO. I'm not talking to the CPOs anymore. I'm not talking to the CROs anymore. It's just I need the buy-in from the CEO. Otherwise, we can just leave it. It's just what it is.
Fascinating.
Because if you have to advise, like let's say you take a relatively big company, like let's say you have a hundred billion, no, sorry, $100 million company per year. Depending on like whether they're in AI or not, you're looking at 150 employees to maybe even 1,000. So something in between there. And that means you usually have like fully staffed 5 different silos with about 2 different management lines. If I have to or sell to the CPO what we're doing, anything which is touching the incentivization models of salespeople, because I'm telling them that, hey, your salespeople cannot be incentivized the same way anymore because otherwise it's not going to be working for the customer. Because of, right, like this mixture between self-serve and demos and so forth. Okay, I'm going to ask them in the next leadership meeting that we're going to have in the next 4 months. It's just not working. Why would the sales leader agree to this, right? So it needs to be driven from the top, otherwise it doesn't work. And just having said that, I work with scale companies, right? So like anything after like 10, $15 million in revenue.
I feel like that's the mic drop moment of this podcast. It needs to come from the top. Like honestly, that is a really
It does,
great
yeah.
insight that I think people just need to hear sometimes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your, the rest of your life. What other kinds of things do you do for fun? We don't get to know much about you personally in most of your.
Yeah, that's true. Even though I publish it in the background. So there's two things in
I
my
see
life.
the
So one
guitars.
of them is smaller, right? Like, so I'm pointing right now to my guitar. I used to play the guitar quite a lot. Right now it's just like a piece of ornament on the wall. I should play it more. But the other things is planes. I'm fascinated by flying planes in general. Like, I think aviation is something really fascinating. But I have developed a new love over the last 6 months, which is crazy. I'm trying to move my 44-year-old body up and down boulder walls.
Oh,
It
climbing.
gives me a lot of confidence in areas that I've never believed in. Like in terms of like developing physical strength and going beyond your limits, also on the physical side. And it's been very fulfilling, and I don't shut up about it. So I haven't written about it on LinkedIn yet. So
That's fantastic.
yeah, I'm not going to do that.
Well, I just want to thank you so much. This has been awesome. I think everybody can hear why people love to read your content and love to hear
I
you speak
appreciate
at
that.
conferences because you have so much to say. So I just want to thank you for being here. This has been just delightful.
Thank you very much for having me. Great questions.
This podcast is an original production of Women in Product. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the Women in Product YouTube channel. Leave us a review so that others can discover us, or share this episode with someone you know. Original music provided by Jenny Hahn. Thanks for joining.